בעברית, ואולי אני גם כן משנה לעברית, אבל אני צריך להתחיל באנגלית, ואיזה שפה שיותר בשבילכם, זה very good. So, in dealing with the question of non-Jewish cheese, you just saw the second parak of Mishnah Masechet Avodah Zarah, of the things, of the foods you encountered, which of them still have halacha lema'aseh implications today? In which of all the foods that you read about? Meaning that are still a live issue. Mina and Yain, Pat, a little bit. Anything else? Yishul begadol. But of the individual food items, there's Vina, Yain, and Pat. Well, Pat is also, generally speaking, very lenient, and some people are machmir during a seret mitzvah on Pat akum. Interesting. It shows up in the Shulchan Aruch. Okay, it's interesting chumrah. But Gvina and Yain, I think, are an important model to help explain what actually Nadav was saying at the very end of Mishum Benotehem. Meaning wine and cheese today are actually foods and drinks that one eats and consumes on a date. There are foods that imply, or at least in some settings imply, a kind of an intimacy that's different than bread and oil. Experientially, for most people, obviously not everybody in every culture, in every time, in every place, but for sure wine and also wine and cheese together are different than bread and oil. And I think that Chazal understood something, and that the halakha today reflects that as well. So I may not make it all the way to the Shulchan Aruch and to, I mean, hopefully I'll get to Rav Moshe and Kaddish cheese. Did people get to the end?
Yeah.
Okay. But the question, the sort of very halakha l'maaseh question, is different, I think, in Kustaret than it is here, because the questions of Mishum Benotehem, the questions of intermarriage, are very different. But I want to just start from the beginning, thinking about, if it's not about ma'achalot asurot, if it's not about some rachiv, not about the ingredient, then what else is going on? And if it is a kind of a formal gzeira midrabanan, that's going to bring up the question of batel tam, batel gzeira, which is obviously a major issue in many tchumim of halakha. So we'll get to that big question in a moment. I want to look quickly at those first two mishnayot, a little Gemara and Rashi, and then open up to a bigger conversation. So, as I noted, sort of in these opening questions, there's really two separate simanim, there are two separate masaktot. There's the sugya of Avodah Zarah as well as the sugya in Cholin, and that fundamentally they're two entirely separate issues, but obviously they're going to overlap as we work through them. The Mishnah distinguishes, the Mishnah Pul and Chet Hey distinguishes between keva and or shel keva. The keva is the milk. Is that okay? We're not nervous about that?
We always do.
No.
That's just normal? Okay, welcome to okay.
I'd be worried if it wouldn't hear.
Okay. So the keva is the milk that's in the stomach of these ruminant mammals. Most mammals that are kosher have four stomachs, or four parts of a stomach. The fourth section of that stomach is known as the keva, or actually the or hakeva. The or hakeva in English is called the abomasum. I don't know what that word meant either. It's called the abomasum. Almost all four-legged, split-hooved ruminant mammals, ruminant means they chew their cud, which are the kosher ones, have four stomachs. The exception is a camel. It doesn't, and it's not kosher. It's interesting, the biology and the halakha seems here to align in an interesting way. So basically, cows, goats, sheep, deer, bison all have four parts of their stomach. The fourth part is where the food is broken down, and part of what breaks down the food is this chemical or this enzyme known as rennet. They call that the keva, that's the liquid stuff, like pir shaba alma in some way, as opposed to the actual skin, the flesh of the animal. The way they used to make cheese was either take milk and actually pour it into the stomach and hang the stomach with the milk inside of it. You can still go to France and buy stinky cheese that way, fancy cheese, I guess, too. You see, you walk into these fancy restaurants and there are cow stomachs hanging with milk inside. That was the way they used to make cheese, basically. Or they would take out a piece of the flesh of the ur hakeva and put that into a vat of milk. That's the process that we're talking about. And it's the enzyme of the rennet that was inside the meat, the or hakeva, that caused milk to curdle and become cheese. So the Mishnah distinguishes in kevat shel nochri v'shel levela asura. You can't drink it. Hama'amid or shel kevak sheira. Im yesh bo benotein tam harei zo asura. But if you can taste it, it's a problem. What's significant here for our purposes is that the Mishnah treats or shel keva like a regular ma'achalot asurot, which is to say the normal rules of natinat tam, right? In the world of basar b'chalav and tarovet, if you can taste it, it's asur. If not, we can assume bitul, maybe it needs shishim, whatever it is. But the Mishnah here does not appear to be concerned about the concept, bigger concept of the davar hama'amid, that or shel keva or kevat nevela appears to not be a problem. The Ran here on the Rif in the back of the Gemara just explains the case. Look at the last piece of the Ran. Amid ba'or shel keva im yesh b'benotin tam harezo asrak mashmalan sha'af al pisha or hakeva ma'amid hachalav. It is. How do you translate ma'amid? How do you understand ma'amid? Gives it form. Good. Gives it form. Lo mitzar b'koldahu. There's still no isur mashu or isur of any small amount. Harehu kashar isurin b'notin tam. It's nothing special. This would be in the Mishnah, in Masechet Avodah Zarah, going to be problematic, obviously, because the Mishnah on Avodah Zarah does something different. Okay, the Aruch HaShulchan again is really just explaining you the mitzvot of keva versus or keva. Now let's look at source number 5 in my packet. This fun Mishnah in Perek Bet Mishnah Hey. This idea of Hesiul Davar Acher is very fascinating.
This idea of what?
Hesiul Davar Acher. If asked the question, gives one answer, Mipnei Shema Amida Onota B'Keva Shel Nevela. Avamina. If that's true, what about the Kohen who can eat what sounds disgusting to me, but a Kohen can shed the Ato Yafa. I think what the Ato Yafa means is like, wants to eat the insides of the animal. It seems gross to me. Okay. If that's the case, why should in fact this be asur? Chazar va'amar kevat eglei avodah zarah. So the hava amina was keva shel nevela. The maskana is keva eglei avodah zarah. That's going to be a huge problem for the Rambam. We'll get there. In Cain, if it's really about avodah zarah, lama lo asura b'hana'ah. If it's really an isur avodah zarah, what are you talking about? Hesiol davar acher, echata korek hiduvim dodecha miyayin. Dodecha dodayech. Fascinating distraction technique. I think it's significant that he goes to Shir Shirim. We'll come back to that in a bit. The Midrash and Shir Hashim Rabbah here appears to be quoting our Mishnah pretty directly. And the last line, basically, the lama lo gilalo. If the Midrash asks the question, which the Yerushalmi asks as well, Rabbi Yonatan bekarov asaruha, Rabbi Yishmael haya katan. Matem chashvim al zeh. Shebekarov asaruha. It's like a new gzeira. Rabbi Yishmael haya katan. Mazal merits Rabbi Yishmael haya katan. What do you make of that part?
I would not understand.
ולא היה מן החכמים הגדולים, היה החכמים הקטנים. אז מה? It's a new gzeira. Therefore you can't tell me why? Because he's a katan and not a gadol. I don't know how those two. I understand what the words mean. Why the fact that he's a katan should mean I can't tell you why this is asur.
They don't want him to be involved in the decision.
Okay, but he is he's the posek here. He's just not a. I don't know. He's not a member of the Sanhedrin yet. Maybe I don't know who the people are even.
It's like he's a say radical חופשי. He's like no מחויב. He's not part of the gilda.
Who are Rav Melamed? Will I Rav Hefter? Okay. Manyan. Good. Says the Gemara in Chulin, and the Gemara in Chulin is now going to try to figure out where does all this, how do these two Mishnayot talk together? Because the Gemara asks, Atu kebat ovek kavim lavin belahi. I don't understand. If non-Jew shechs it, obviously it's a bela. Well, the first answer is Chashina Shemiyamak Yanak Treifa. Shmuel Amar, no, you read the Mishnah wrong. Chadaktani kebat chitat uved kochavim is obviously a nevela. But why should kebat nevela be a problem? That doesn't make any sense. Because v'ha'amar Shmuel b'nei ma'asru g'vinata uved kochavim mipnei shema'amidin otav or kebat nevela. Ha keva gufa sharia. But isn't that if it's just the keva, it shouldn't be a problem? Lo kasha kan kodem chazara, kan la'achar chazara. So how are the two Mishnayot related to each other? Are the Gemara and the Mishnah related to each other? Want to explain what does Rashi say? Okay, so livnei chazara chashuvu she'ahava min ze mishum kivat nevela, ulamaskana ze mishum kivat avodah zara. And Alma Rashi that I underlined, chazarmu mikivat nevela mishum delav gufahi, v'asruhu mishum avodah zara da pilu pirsha dida asur pilu b'mashahu. Because if it gets bigger, it's even asur. Hilkach mishnatenu zot mishneit kodem chazara. What does that mean, lama'aseh?
It's not a question of what that's the issue. It's an ingredient based.
According to which Mishnah? Is it that way?
According to the
Lifnei chazara. But that, what does that mean, lama'aseh? If it's it's not lama'aseh, right? That's what I'm getting to. You're right. In abstract, you're right. The itmar de Shmuel the or kevahu da asur hakeva sharia la'achar chazara ka'amar umishnatenu zot mikevan shenishneit afal pi shechazar bo lo zaza mimikoma. If you think of the Mishnah as an oral document, right? Once it gets codified in there by the person who memorized it, it doesn't go anywhere. Below sealed kuha, you can't edit it out. There's no copy paste. Below amru shalo lishnotar, no one told them not to. Therefore, but that means that it's not about kevat nevela. That means it's about kevat iglei avodah zara. So the havamina was it's kevat nevela, then it's kevat iglei avodah zara, and then he see uladavar, which means that it's asur, but I don't want to tell you why it's asur. So there are two things that fascinate me about this. First is the conversation that is reported here, but also the fact that Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi decides to put that in the Mishnah. I mean, if you're Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi sometime in the beginning of the 3rd century, and you have a Mesorah of this conversation, and you think it should still be asur, why would you tell me this? What does it mean to codify an isur that doesn't have a reason? How can you do that? Codify an isur she'anachnu lo mevinim et hasiba. Kavuha b'mishnah b'li siba or b'li sfara. Let's say you wanted to come up with something that's asur, and you knew it should be asur, but you didn't have a good reason why. You're the rabbi of the community. What would you do?
I know that's what you call love shine.
Okay, it would be very hard to get away with that in the 21st century. I'm going to push you one more time. Can you think of something in the history of halakha in the last 250 years where you think that it should be asur, but you're not sure why? So now you don't have to be the protected robot. It ought to be asur. Okay, smartphones. Yeah, maybe they should. Maybe they shouldn't be asur all the time. It's good to have Zoom. Okay, electricity on Shabbat. Right, when electricity on Shabbat first came out, everyone was trying to figure out where does it belong? Is it Aish? Is it Boneh? And by trying to put it into a category of one of the Lamatzet Malachot, it turns out Lamase they were wrong. It's not Aish. What is it? Why is electricity forbidden on Shabbat? Uvda dechol zeh mamash isur is isur bli tam. Doesn't feel like Shabbos to me if I have my phone. In the end, that's a kind of an isur where we say it's usher to use electricity on Shabbat, but I can't really tell you why. But if you were to use electricity on Shabbat, it would change the experience of Shabbat in such a fundamental way that it's asur. And if you're going to ask me why, it's not Shabbos. That's actually an important tool that we need in our halachic toolkit to be able to say, this is not a good idea. It doesn't fit in a category of the Lametet Melachot. It fits in some broad thing called Udadachol. Yeah?
And it's not just ritual. It's also, there is a morality that's like the name of Torah that,
Okay.
it's like, it's wrong. There's nothing in the Torah about it, but it's wrong.
Here's a great example of exactly that. I think it's asur to eat veal. Anybody know what veal is? What's veal in Hebrew? Egel, but egel that's made at least in the States. I don't know how it's made here. We take a small little calf. It gets raised in a tiny little box. It never sees the light of day. It gets fattened up. It tastes delicious. And the animal suffers from its birth until its shchita. Or Ken, Mazev? Foie gras. אותו דבר. צריך להיות אסור. זה צריך להיות אסור, אבל אין איסור. זה לא עניין של צער בעלי חיים. למה? כי אנחנו נהנים מזה. כי זה טעים. והאמת היא שזה מאוד טעים. וזה אסור, אף על פי כן. Rav Moshe finds a tshuva about veal, where he said the reason veal is asur is because the animals become treifot. Turns out he was wrong. The incidence of treifot in veal is the same as any other animal. He assumed it was that. He just didn't know.
Maybe make it people accept it. Not everyone will accept it. Not Shabbosdik. Shabbosdik is
Okay.
You can argue.
You can.
And
So Rav Moshe, זה לא צער בעלי חיים וזה גם זה לא עניין של למתת מלאכות. אבל הבעיה אם אומרים שזה טריפה וזה באמת זה לא טריפה, זה also בעייתי.
נכון, אבל המחשבה מאחורי זה אולי אנשים יקנו את זה יותר.
אוקיי, אם אומרים שזה באמת עניין של למתת מלאכות, עניין של טריפה, אז הרב משה אמר שזה אסור מדין טריפה, אז צריך להיות אסור. Okay. But what if you know it doesn't fit? Meaning what's happening in Hisiul Davar Acher is Rabbi Yishmael knows that it actually doesn't fit into the normal categories of Machalot Asurot. And he has to figure something out. So I wrote a piece that was published just before the Super Bowl of America about why watching football is Asur, American football.
I think I saw that.
Because football, I mean, this is not the point of this year at all, but football is basically like gladiators. Just people don't die right in front of you. They all just get brain damage and will die several years later. And those are the statistics. If you want to, you can look them up. Nearly every professional American football player will get tremendous brain damage over the course of a professional career. So basically, we're watching people kill each other just a little bit slowly. And therefore I said it's asur, but I had to find a category to put it in, like gladiators or משהו כזה.
זה מרתק מה שאתה אומר, אבל זה נכנס לאזור מאוד אפור, לכל כך הרבה תחומים, כאילו, מכירים אותי כבר, אבל אני
אוקיי, את יכולה בעברית.
אז זה בדיוק זה, האם כשאתה רואה מישהו שמשתמש במשהו שכולם עושים וזה בסדר ולגיטימי, אם אני יודעת שזה הרסני וממית, האם מותר לי לעמוד מנגד ולא לעשות כלום? כאילו אתה בעצם אומר, זה מקובל חברתית, כולם עושים את זה, זה לא באמת הורג ישירות, אתה נכנס לדקויות מאוד מאוד עדינות של הלכה, ואפשר להשליך את זה על המון המון תחומים.
כן. The biggest pushback that I got was, well, if it's, how can you claim that it's just football? So many other things.
Driving.
Okay, in kvar az kvar. But so I said, you can't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. So, okay, football's asur, boxing should be asur, NHL hockey should be asur, lots of other things that should be asur. And I think sort of, mehabata musari, and yeah.
I was just thinking about this, Rabbi Yishmael. So kids, I mean, not that he was necessarily a kid, but the kids push boundaries a lot more than adults do. Adults are much easier to accept parameters and boundaries that are set by their peers or by people even older than them. And kids don't.
So maybe he was a teenager.
Well, whatever. I mean, when I was reading it, it snapped to me of like, he knew that Rabbi Yishmael would challenge him, just because if you don't convince me, then I don't have to, then I don't have to buy into it.
It's also not the safa of our community. Right? It sounds like das Torah. The rabbi said you have to vote for so and so, or the following thing is usher, but you can't ask questions. It's not the way we're used to thinking. And sometimes I think our community needs to be reminded that things that are ethically problematic are also usher. Even if I can't show you a pasuk or a gemara or a line in the Shulchan Aruch, killing people slowly is usher. Same thing with smoking, by the way. You have to be able to say that out loud, even if you can't find a line in the Shulchan Aruch to say it. That's one of the challenges of being part of a sort of a whatever we are, is that it's hard for us to say that. Okay, let's look at the Gemara in Avodah Zarah. So the Gemara in Avodah Zarah explains the question of why Hisiu lo davar acher, Amar Ula ve'etem Rav Shmuel bar Abba, Zera chadashahi ve'ein mefakin ba. It was too new. It's similar to that language that appears in the Yerushalmi in the Shir Shirim Rabbah. My gezerta. So the Gemara asks, okay, tell me what's the purpose of the gezerah? We've got 6 different answers. When there's so many answers that probably nobody knows the real answer. That's usually a hint. First answer is mishum nikur, because the snakes are spitting their venom in there. And then the Gemara says, "V'leima le mishum nikur." If that's the isur, so why don't you just tell me? So kedulah damarula ki gazre gezerta b'ma'arava lo maglu ta'ama ad tresar yarchei sha'ata. They wait a while. So I should have not told anybody why football is asur and waited a year or 12, whatever it is, and then they'll know. Dilma ika inish de lo svirle va'atil zilzuleba. So imagine you had the authority to say X is asur, but I can't tell you.
It's like wine. It needs to age.
So look at Rashi. Dilma ika. So late lela hahu ta'ama velo badil mineu mezalzalba aval hashta de lo maglu ta'ama de milta badle minei ule alma. They don't know why, so they'll stay away. The opposite of our contemporary intuition. Disavri kaman rabanan b'milta ta'ati minei churva. Va'ananhu de lo biki'inan b'ta'ama. They knew something that we don't know. We don't think about that way today about our rabbis. Okay, then we get. I'm just going to skip Tzich Tuchei Chalav for now. Shmuel Amar. This is going to be obviously Halacha L'Maaseh. Shmuel Amar Bnei Shema'amid Dinotah B'Or Kevat Nevela. Section little number 3. Akeva Gufa Sharia. Umi Amar Shmuel Hachi. So the same little Sakvataria. Batanan Kevat Ha'oved Kochavim Vishel Nevela Harezo Asura V'Havinan Batu Dobro Gavim Lav Nevelahi. Amar Shmuel Chada Ketani Kevat Shechita Ved Kochavim Nevela Asura. Lokasha Kan Kodem Chazara Kan Lachar Chazara Mishnah Zaz Omar Rashi. Again, Rashi does the same thing. It just explains how the 2 Mishnayot are related. Ota Mishnah de Shchitat Chulin de Kevat Oved Kochavim Nevela Ve'asruha Nishneit Kodem Shechazar Bo Rabbi Yeshua Midbar Shalom Rabbi Yishmael. But obviously, L'Maaseh, we don't hold that way. That's the whole point. Then Rav Chisda says Bechometz and then Besrafa or La. Tosfot. Verse number 10. The Omer Rabbeinu Tam in the red letters, big letters. Ki akshav lo matzinu tam pashut la'isur b'rkvina tahovdei kochavim. The Tama Yisur Mishum Nikur, and he claims based on the Klalei HaPsak that we should pass like Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. It goes through other Tanaim, other Rishonim who agree, including Rabbeinu Chananel and the Seder Tanaim va'Amoraim, who explain that the halacha is like Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, kind of kum. And the implication is Elavadai ein hatam ela mishum nikvar va'anu she'ein nechashim mitzugin beinenu ein lachush mishum galui, and therefore all cheese is permitted. L'maaseh, meaning Rabbeinu Tam, Rabbeinu Chananel, the Seder Tanaim va'Amoraim, hold that it's mutar. Going in our bona as well. the next little section that I put here on the page is an extremely important methodological statement for the Baalei HaTosfot, because it raises the question of Batel Tam, Batel Gzeira. So let's look at this, and then this is a very important conversation. Ve'ein lomar the davar shebibinyan, because if it were a davar shebibinyan, we can't be matir. Ki vadai hu asru techila meirosh, when they made this gzeira lo asru ela b'makom shahanechashim mitzuim, only would have asred it when there were snakes around. Kmo she'afaresh lagabi yain nesach v'gam b'harbei mekomot yesh ochelim otam v'nei shema'amidin otam beprachim. That'll raise the question of microbial rent. So when do we say this and when do we not? When do you say batel tam batel gzeira? And when do you say batel tam lo batel gzeira? So this is a major shita of the Baalei HaTosfot in general, that as a matter of a principle, you can say sometimes batel tam batel gzeira, but not all the time. So how do you know when you say that and when you don't? Anybody have a theory? A famous version of this is clapping and dancing on Shabbat. Right? The Gemara, the Mishnah, the Masechet, the beginning of Masechet Beitzah says you can't like slap your thigh or dance or clap. And Tosfot says that's only Asur Shem Yitak and Klishir. And it seems like he's talking about going outside and like taking a reed and fashioning an instrument. And Einan Uvekiyin B'zeh Achshav, and therefore we can clap. How does that work? I can't do that. Say, what do you mean by that?
I mean, people are going to do it.
So it's not people.
Or people.
It's not people are going to do it.
They are.
It's they are doing it. Meaning it works in Tosfot b'diavad. Meaning he says people eat it already. He's describing a reality where Jews, and in his mind, from Jews, are eating cheese produced by non-Jews. And for the Baalei HaTosfot, a minhag of Klal Yisrael has the same authority as a text of the Gemara. If the Jews are doing it, it's presumably therefore mutar. But I have a gzeira, mishum nikur. Batel tam batel gzeira works when looking backwards. It doesn't work looking forwards. I can't say I want to be mevatel this gzeira, therefore. So this comes up. We're just 3 weeks away. Kitniot. Everybody goes crazy about kitniot. I'll say mitzidi. I can live for a week without rice and beans. I'll survive. The way that as a great case of batel tam, lo batel gzeira. The only way to change it is everybody has to start eating kitniot, or Ashkenazim have to start eating kitniot, and it's happening more here meaning in Israel, in part because of intermarriage, Ashkenazi Sephardi. That's the good kind of intermarriage. And it's happening slowly in Chutz La'aretz too. But it only works b'diavad, meaning once there is a kahal, I don't know how to describe it, enough people who are perceived to be shomrei mitzvot eating kitniot, somebody, Rav Malam, is going to look back and say, oh, batel tam, batel gzeira. It's like a batel baro. And we don't even rely on batel baro for kitniot. It's crazy. We treat kitniot like chametz gamur. And there are lots of gzeirot that if we would allow the possibility of batel tam, batel gzeira, could totally shift it. Now, the question of electricity and Shabbat comes back. If it's a gzeira, so the way I often say it is, we're going to have to find a way to forbid our smartphones on Shabbat and permit our smart homes on Shabbat. Meaning we're coming to a time where fairly soon you won't be able to like flush your toilet on Shabbos. Or walk into your house or open your fridge or walk out your door. And it's going to be impossible. We're going to be you can't for Pesach programs. Oh, it's crazy. The Pesach programs, Hashem Yishmor. But at some point, it's just going to be impossible to walk in the streets, and it's all grama, and it's the Rabbanan, and it's the Chol. We'll come up with ways, and eventually we'll have some guy from Brooklyn come and put a switch, so it'll be okay. But at some point, it'll just be impossible. Maybe not for us, maybe for our kids or for our grandkids, it would simply be impossible to flush the toilet, and therefore ein brera. In the place that I stayed in Tel Aviv, when I walked up the stairs, the lights went on. I got nervous, but for Shabbat, they were just left on. Somebody left them on. If I didn't press any buttons, I didn't know what was going to happen. But at some point, we're going to be stuck in a world where there's just no choice. Okay, questions? Yeah.
Well, it sounds like basically what you're saying is that we trust the notion of the diavad, that they're our own diavad. It sounds like you're saying that we trust people's wishes such that what all Israel is doing is essentially like Gufo Shel Torah, like, as in, Imon Nevi'im Yibnei Nevi'im. Like, people have a certain sense inside of what to do, and when people, when there's a sufficient majority of people who have changed their practice, then the Xerat essentially, it's like.
The question, of course, is who counts as Klal Yisrael?
I was just going to say,
It was
the way we have
Who-
different
right? Because if we were to
days,
say that, then the minhag is to drive on Shabbos, right? Obviously, it doesn't go all the way. It has to be, well, the community of Jews who
are observant.
Shomer Shabbos, or the community of Jews who Shomer Shabbos like me, or the community of Jews who daven like me. How do you decide who's Klal Yisrael? And if you're like, how tall is your mechitza? Where's the roll? Does that matter? Is that what makes you in and out? Right? It becomes very messy very quickly. So I would say, generally speaking, how I think about it is the community of Jews who care seriously about halakha, and I would include as wide of a migvan in that group of people as possible. There are certainly people to our collective right who don't see me as part of that group of people. Chaval, okay. I still love that. Just before we go to the Rambam, I think part of the intuition of Hesi'ol Davar Acher to go to Shir Hashirim, Ki Tovim Dodecha, is Mishum Benotehem, meaning there's something sexual there. There's something about the intimacy. And that's why he chooses the pasuk from Shir Hashirim. Because he could have, in theory, he could have put anything at that point. Why Dafka Shir Hashirim?
It's also like share the context is Yain and Shemen.
The pasuk works.
Yain, Shemen, and Nav, like say what we say about Yain.
Yeah.
And also it's saying, like, if you read Shir Hashirim as being about the relationship between the love between God and Israel, then it's saying, we have something that's better than your delicious shemen or cheese or wine, and that's okay. You're like,
Okay, great. Yeah, it makes sense in the sort of literary context and in the metaphorical a little bit. I think it is significant stuff, because one could have imagined many other Tutina. Okay. If it was only Tosfot, so it would be finished. The year would be over, and it would be very simple and more delicious. But it is not only Tosfot. So what does the Rambam do? What does the Rambam think? The Rambam in the Perush HaMishnayot says, "V'sibat yisur gbina shel goyim shema ya'amidena ba'ur kebat nevela." Why is that a problem? What problem does the Rambam face to say it's mishum or kebat nevela? כן, אז מה? למה זה בעייתי מצד ההלכה איך שלמדנו את הסוגיה עד כה? זה לפני החזרה. הרמב"ם פוסק את המשנה לפני החזרה. הוא יכול לעשות את זה. אוקיי, הוא הרמב"ם, הוא יכול. זה האמת, הוא יכול. אבל זה נגד המשנה, זה נגד הגמרא. אפילו הרמב"ם יכול לפסוק נגד המשנה והגמרא, זה איך הוא עשה את זה. הוא שם מהפכה לחומרה, הר"ן על המשנה שם כתב, שאור כבת נבלה, זה כמו שאר איסורים, יש ביטול לפי נתינתם, או שישים. הרמב"ם אומר לא, זה לא איסור רגילה, משהו אחרת, זה דבר המעמיד, ויש לו סטטוס אחרת. נגד המשנה והגמרא, זה הרמב"ם פוסק כלפני חזרה. בואו נקרא במשנה תורה. מפני זה, מאכלות אסורות פרק ג' הלכה י"ג, מפני זה ייתן הדין שכל חלב הנמצא בירק ומאסור שמא ערב בו חלב בהמה טמאה. חשש מאכלות אסורות בחלב. וגבינת העקום מותרת שאין חלב בהמה טמאה מתגבה. מותרת פה, זאת אומרת מותרת מדאורייתא. אבל בימי חכמי המשנה, גזרו על גבינת העקום ואסרו, למה? מפני שמעמידין אותה באור קיבה של שחיטתן שהיא נבלה. כמו המשנה לפני החזרה לפי שמואל. ואם תאמר והלא אור הקיבה דבר קטן הוא עד מאוד, וחלב שעמד בו, ולמה לא יבטל במיעוטו, ולמה זה לא כמו כל מאכלות אסורות תערובת טעם כל דיני טעם, מפני שהוא המעמיד הגבינה, which is against the Ran's reading of the Mishnah. והואיל דבר האסור הוא שהעמיד הרי הכל אסור כמו שהתפאר. Since the דבר המעמיד itself is a דבר האסור, וזה לא בתערובת הבשר עם החלב, אלא הנבלה עצמה הוא המעמיד, אז האוכל תמיד אסור. כך פוסק הרמב"ם נגד פשט המשניות. And then he says, י"ד, גבינה שמעמידין אותה העקום בעשבים ובמי פירות, שאמר התוספות שמותרות, בחכמי נרבונה, כגון שרף התאנים, והרי הן ניכרים בגבינה, הורו מקצת הגאונים שהיא אסורה. הורו מקצת הגאונים. הרמב"ם בדרך כלל לא מדבר בלשון כזה. הורו מקצת הגאונים. הרמב"ם לשיטתו לא מביא אנשים אחרים. בדרך כלל כשהרמב"ם מביא מישהו אחר, זה לחלוק עליו. הקוד של הרמב"ם זה שיטתו של הרמב"ם להפוקי כולם. הטור כשהוא פוסק, כשהוא מביא כל מיני שיטות, מביא את דברי הרבנו תם, והרייבד והרמב"ם וכולי וכולי. הרמב"ם כשהוא כותב קוד, הוא פוסק כל הלכה. זה הקוד שאנחנו מצפים בדרך כלל. הטור זה יש מגוון של פוסקים. השולחן ערוך בדרך כלל כמו הרמב"ם, יש לו יש אומרים ויש אומרים, יש אולי כללי הפסיקה. כשהרמב"ם אומר מקצת גאונים, הייתי חושב שהוא מביא אותם לחלוק עליהם. שכבר גזרו על כל גבינת העקום בין שהם ידעו בדבר האסור, בין שהם ידעו בדבר המותר, גזירה משום שמעמידין אותו בדבר האסור. מה זה? איך קוראים לזה בהלכה? מה? לא שמעתי? מה זה? איך קוראים לסטרקצ'ר הזה? אטו? כן, אבל זה אטומה. מה האטום? אטומה? זה גזירה לגזירה. כן? יש גזירה מדרבנן, וגוזרים גזירה עוד גזירה, שלא לעבור על הגזירה העיקרית. לא גוזרים גזירה לגזירה, אלא אם כן גוזרים גזירה לגזירה. הכלל היא שלא גוזרים גזירה לגזירה, אבל לפעמים גוזרים גזירה לגזירה, וכך זה מפורש. הוא אומר שזה מותר מדאורייתא, ימי חכמי המשנה גזרו, והורו מקצת גאונים עוד גזירה אחרת. אסור לעשות את זה, אלא אם כן אתה הרמב"ם. אחר כך הוא אומר, אוכל גבינת העקום, וחלב שחלבו עקום, ואין איסור רואהו, מכין אותו מכת מרדות, זה עדיין עומד באיסור דרבנן. והבאתי פה הכסף משנה, שהוא הרב יוסף קארו, והוא אומר, משמע שכך ידעת רבנו שאם לא כן, הווה לי להביא דברי החולקים עליהם. So, זה מאוד קשה לדעת מתי הרמב"ם מביא שיטה אחרת וחולק, מתי הרמב"ם מביא שיטה אחרת ומסכים. אוקיי, הכסף משנה טוען שהוא מסכים פה. מעיקר הדין מדאורייתא גבינה מותרת. ימי חכמי המשנה גזרו משום קיבת אור נבלה. אורו מקצת גאונים אפילו בעשבים. שמא אור קיבת נבלה. לגזירה לגזירה. הוא אומר שהייתם גזירה בחכמי המשנה, ואחר כך מקצת הגאונים. לפי הלשון שלו נראה לי שזה שתי גזירות בשתי תקופות שונות, שגזירת הגאונים זה משום גזירת החכמים, זה גזירה לגזירה. Okay, I'm not going to do the Tosfot Rid deals with the question of how the Rambam can apparently go against the Mishnah. How can you pass like the Havamina? He quotes this Rimi Gash. The Rimi Gash is an interesting character in general. He was a Rebbe of the Rambam's father. I put the whole Rimi Gash at the end. You can enjoy it. It's like Oneg Shabbos. Have a great time with it another time. It'll take us too far afield. Let's look at the Shulchan Aruch actually. We'll get to some halakha l'maaseh. Even better, we'll start with those last 3 lines of the Beit Yosef that I brought right before the Shulchan Aruch that I enjoyed. This is one of the things that I push very hard is that the Beit Yosef was the book that Rabbi Yosef Karo wrote for people who know how to learn halakha. The Shulchan Aruch was written for people who need a shorthand, and you should all be learning the Beit Yosef, and then you can learn the Shulchan Aruch. And I often joke with my students, you can paskin just from the Shulchan Aruch without having learned the Beit Yosef. It's rabbinic malpractice. So if somebody's asking you whether or not to say Tachanun today, it's okay to just paskin from the Shulchan Aruch. Somebody's asking you a question that's like a little bit weightier than that, so if we're going to skip Avarachamim the Shabbos, then you need to have learned the Gemara and the Rishonim, at least through the Beit Yosef, l'fachot. And he says here, V'kol sheken, right, the V'kol sheken sheb'makom she'arambam be'harash b'shem ha'amudei ha'olam osrim, v'gam ki b'kol shar mekamot yishal sheshamanu, shema'anu nohagim la'asor, ve'inam mabchinim ben ma'amidim prachim le'ma'amidim b'keva, she'asur lifrosh b'klal Yisrael v'lifrosh geder Yisrael kedoshim asher kadru avot ha'olam chachmei ha'mishnah. So Haramam lo yadu et chachmei Narbona, lo yada et Rabbeinu Tam. So kol ha'Yehudim sheHaramam yada hem asru gvinat hakum, as hu gam ken asar gvinat hakum. Chaser lo Facebook. Okay, ma omer HaShulchan Aruch. The Shulchan Aruch basically quotes the Lashon Harambam, hakuvino ta'uvdei kochavim asarum, mipnei shema'amidim otam ba'or kevat shchitatam shehin velah. Afilu he'emiduhu ba'asavim asaruha. The first line is the Gezerah of Hakmei Mishnah. The second line is the Gezerah of Horu Miksat HaGeonim, straight Lashon Harambam. L'chal l'maaseh, no heterim. Aval says the Rama, v'chen ha'minhag be'ein lifrotz geder. Be'ein lifrotz geder is an important concept for the Rama. Im lo, it's also an important phrase. Ein lifrotz geder, except in the following case. The makom shenagu bahem heter. I love that. This is totally asur. Ein lifrotz geder. It's makad mardus.
Except for this dude.
Except for those people who are mekilim and paskin like Rabbeinu Tam. On the one hand, it's like it's wild, but it's the Rama. The Rama is not usually like a pluralist in halakha. He's not known for his liberal views. But here he's saying he's clearly aware of the fact that Rabbeinu Tam, the Chachmei Narbona, and maybe even into Ashkenaz, all the way in the 16th century, people were mekil on Gvinat Goy. And therefore, how can I say these Rum Jews that I know in Krakow are not Shomer Kashrut, Efshar Lot Aladat? And then he kind of comes up with a way around some of these problems. V'im ha'Yisrael ro'eh asiyat ha'gvinot v'hachaliva mutar. What does that mean? How does that help? What does that line turn us back to? It's b'diavad. What kind of concern is addressed by Yisrael Yoshev v'ro'eh? Kashrut ma'achalot asurot. The lo inyan shel mishum benotehem. The inyan shel ma'achalot asurot. Biglal shelefi haShulchan Aruch veHarambam, the inyan shel kevat nevela, the inyan shel ma'achalot asurot. As im yodim be'emet shelo ha'emiduha be'or kevat nevela, ki ha'Yisrael Yoshev v'ro'ehu was mutar. Okay. Good. Shulchan Aruch. Now the Rama also says something very important. Source number 4 in Pei Zayin Yud Aleph. Pei Zayin Yud Yud Aleph. Or hakeva. Chshav yesh chelak min hakeva. Chelak meha flesh of the keva. Lifamim molchim oto umiyabshin oto v'naaseh ke'etz. Umimali'im oto חלב מותר. דמאחר שנתייבש הווה כעץ בעלמא, ואין בו לחלוכית בשר. You go today to a cheese making factory, what you find is a liquid enzyme called rennet that was first hardened, made into nityavesh ka'etz, and then made into liquid so you could pour it into a vat of milk. So what that means is that all rennet today, whether it's microbial rennet, meaning from plants, or actual animal rennet from a cow's abomasum, has basically been nityavesh ka'etz. All cheese, unless you go to France and find gestookene cheese sitting in a cow's stomach, all cheese everywhere in the world is this. Don't tell anybody that I'm telling you that all cheese is kosher. Chas v'shalom. However, according to this line of the Rama, all cheese should be kosher. Yeah. Rabbi Isaac Klein. Rabbi Isaac Klein was the posek of the conservative movement in the early 1900s. He said this, as did the Chazon Ish, has better Orthodox credentials than Rabbi Isaac Klein. And he's not just this, as did Chaim Ozer, like many people said this. Based on this line of the Rama, from Chaim Ozer deals with gelatin, which is why, by the way, the Rabbanut HaRashit will give hashgachot to Mentos. Same Mentos in Chutz La'aretz, can't get with hashgacha. But you can have the Israeli Mentos in the kosher stores in New York. It's like crazy. The same exact food. The Rabbanut gives hashgacha here, but in Chutz La'aretz, no one will do it. Chaim Ozer says it's totally betar because not nityavesh v'nasek, all gelatin products. Marshmallows, Mentos, gum, v'kulei v'kulei. Good. לא רק נתייבש ועץ, עושים עליו chemicals, כמה נפסל מאכילה לגמרי. אפילו מצידי אין שאלה הלכתית, זה הופך להיות שאלה של מבנותיהם. כי מצד השאלה של המאכלות האסורות, אין שאלה בגבינה היום, חוץ מבצרפת. כל הגבינה היום באמת מצד השאלה של מאכלות אסורות באמת מותרות. לא.
וגם למה שבנות...
Okay, so we'll get there. Okay, I'm going to skip to the end. I'm sorry.
למה שבנותיהם יהיה רק הגבינה?
כי זה המשנה. המשנה אומרת. אני אוהב את המשנה. Let's go to Rav Moshe. The Shach says in order for this to work, it's not just Yisrael Yoshev or Ehu. You actually have to rent out and own a portion of the animal. So there are cheese factories in America that have a kosher day. And the Jews come and they rent out the factory for a day, make the cheese, and then the next day they no longer...
There's the Tatsa family. They are in charge of like all the kosher cheese in Italy, and they go to all the different factories and like clean it all out. Have like a day where they do like a full round of cheese, and like those all get like put on.
So it's what's crazy is the following. There's no such thing as cleaning it out. You know what happens? Every Friday, this is America. Every Friday they clean the factories. The normal cleaning process is a hechsher. The Jewish day or the kosher day is a Monday. A friend of mine goes to these things. He like actually makes cheese. It's the same cheese on Monday as it is on Tuesday. On Monday it gets a hashgacha, on Tuesday it doesn't. It's a mamash oto davar. The same ingredients, the same everything. So he shows up there. With 10 other rabbis from 10 other hashgacha organizations. And the first time he's a guy like my age, most of the people there are substantially older than he is. The way it works is usually the rabbi watches what happens and sits in an office learning. So he shows up on the first time that he shows up in Vermont, and he's like, I want to learn about how to make cheese. So can I like, I want to pour the gel, I want to pour the rennet in.
They don't want him anywhere near it.
So he learned how to make cheese, and he's like, if you ever see pictures of people throwing cheddar, it's actually quite cool. And he's like really involved in making the cheese, and it gets he puts his hashgacha on it, as does the OU, Chaf K, Star K, everybody. And the OU and Chaf K doesn't like this guy. He's like a rogue, whatever. But he's actually involved in making the cheese. He understands it, making it. It is no good, but the OU is great.
How's he a rogue guy?
He gives hashgacha to vegan places. It's okay. Vegan tivoni. Hukuma Rav Malan. He's in Providence, Rabbi Barry Dollinger. If anybody knows of him, if you don't know of him, you should look him up. He actually wrote a manifesto about why all cheese should be kosher.
I forget the name from anyway.
Yes, I'm sure you have from now, right? Yes, because he's one of the few people who actually knows how food is produced, like mass productive food. He goes to factories and stuff, knows a lot about the actual process of making cheese. He also does this really cool matzah mitzvah, where he bakes matzah, he makes soft matzah, and all the proceeds go to fight human trafficking, to fight slavery. It's actually quite beautiful. I don't know if he ships to Israel, but if he does, you should buy them. Okay, let's look at Rav Moshe on cottage cheese. You gotta love Rav Moshe's Yiddish phrases. It's like when I read the news, when I read the newspapers in Israel, I can't read all these cognates. Rav Moshe's Yiddish cognates I could figure out, but Israeli newspapers are just impossible. So binyan gvina b'shem cottage cheese im hi bichlal yisur gvina d'nochrim. So the point here of this issue is that all soft cheese can be made with a curdling agent, rennet, but the curdling agent is not necessary. You can put in the rennet to speed up the process, but it's not necessary. This is all soft cheese, includes yogurts, etc., etc. I often look up the dates and the days of Rav Moshe's Shelot and Shuvot. I highly recommend looking up days and dates of Shuvot, because you see what the Dolim do at different times of the year. Many of his Shuvot were written on like July 4th in America. I'm sitting there at a barbecue enjoying my hot dogs, which should be usher, by the way, because they're so bad for you. Okay, once a year, it's okay. And Rav Moshe is sitting there writing Shuvot. Okay, halavai. He says, he made v'dvar gvina b'shem cottage cheese she'amarti sheyesh tam lahakel umar shelo hayta bichlal yisur gvina. The way that Rav Moshe has to say it is not that cottage cheese was part of the gzeirah and I'm going to remove it from the gzeirah. That Rav Moshe can't do, because once you have a gzeirah that's treated as a davar she'minyan, tzarich minyan acher lahatiro. Rav Moshe is not can't be that minyan because it's the Shulchan Aruch and the Rambam. So it never was part of the gzeirah. Da'ikar hatam hu mipnei shema'amidin ota be'or kivat nevela. The tam zehu nakata Rambam be'perak gimel v'amechaber. That's how we paskin the Havamina of the Mishnah. Umitam zeh katvu atosvot tegaon narbona hitiro otam b'makom mitam shema'amidin otam be'prachim. Fascinating that Rav Moshe was willing to use the Gaonei Narbona as a raya for cottage cheese. He won't say it for hard cheese, for regular cheese that requires rennet. Hakavana pashut shelo ayri ba'amad sham Yisrael v'ra'a shehani b'prachim. It's not that I watched it happening. Dizeh pshita da'af k'shehami b'kevot k'sherot hayu mutarin. If it were in fact the case that we knew the ingredients were kosher, it would be okay. Kimefurash baramasham ra'a Yisrael asiyat hagvinot k'sherot. So here again, if you know that all the ingredients are kosher, then it's kosher, which is why Isaac Klein and the Chazon Ish can say that in a case in which you know that all the cheese is actually being made with kosher ingredients, because all rennet is nit yavsha, and the say yavesh ke'et, or whatever language we'll use, or it's a panim chadashot, or a davar chadash, Rav Moshe won't say it out loud, but the svara that he applies to cottage cheese can very easily be applied to regular cheese, hard cheese. And then the Shach points out, he points out, Shach shepaleg al Rama, lo hivirai midin hamidua ba'asabim hane'emar sham lisur, shemina yadin lo hamad sham Yisrael ela ayri shederach anshe makom shema amidin v'prachim sheyesh midin ala mezal bataruba. That place, it was rove, was with flowers. By the way, Bismaninu rove is also kosher. That's the whole point. It's only France. שגם העכו"ם זה הם בפרחים. ולכן מתירים גדולי רבנו אף בלא רע ישראל. Next paragraph. אבל אם כן יש טעם גדול שרק הגבינות שצריכים לאיזה העמדה, regular hard cheese, אך במקום העמדה באור קיבה מעמידים בפרחים, בזה פליגי על גאוני רבנו ואסרי משום ששייך פה לגזור משום שמעמידים בדבר האוסר. But there is no such thing as מעמידים בדבר האוסר בזמננו. Or I could say it more softly, is that rov ha'amada of cheese is b'davar ha'mutar. There is almost no such thing as ma'amidim b'davar ha'asur. Aval ha'gvinot levanot she'ein tzarich laha'amada. They don't need rennet. Minitinat eza davar klal demi eitzim u'umadim b'meshach hazman u'mechom ha'makom einam b'chlal ha'isur. It never was part of the gzeira. Was never entered into the conversation because it doesn't need rennet. Okay, and then he points out Rav Moshe himself is also very makel on what he calls chalav companies, regular Stam FDA approved milk. That's another great Rav Moshe-ism, chalav companies. Chalav companies, he says, basically means Stam. Rav Moshe's shita is that chalav Stam, which maybe should be asur if you're not on chalav Israel, because of the presence of the FDA, is really nechshav kechalav Yisrael.
יש פיקוח שאין ייחוד.
כי יש פיקוח שאין ייחוד. שיודעים שאין חשש. וזה אותו הסברה לגבינה. כי אין חשש על אור קיבת נמלה, כי לא מעמידים באור קיבת. אבל הוא לא מוכן להגיד את זה. By the way, the chalav companies is interesting. One of Rabbi Dallinger's ideas is to put Zoom cameras in all the farms, and then he could be Yisrael Yoshev Ro'ehu in Providence. It seems so obvious.
That's the focus.
Um,
That's gonna happen soon.
Why do I have to go travel all the way to Vermont? Was that a thought of it?
Just anyway. Nobody looks.
Of course, it's all, but so that's why, like, you have a batteries low. No, it's just saying that it's being streamed.
Good.
So maybe yes, switch.
Was that a question?
Yeah, I don't know if it's relevant for right now, but we went a little bit into the tablet pay and triangle pay. Just for those of us who have, like, I get this a lot about tablet pay. And I was wondering,
Yeah, so I'll say bottom
and maybe
line.
you can explain also what the issue is.
Right. So in Chutz La'aretz, there's all this thing. There's this idea of hashkachot that nobody relies on. Many people don't rely on for whatever reason. Sometimes it's really just politics and power, and it's sort of the multi-million-billion-dollar kashrus industry. And I try to ignore those things and just rely. Sometimes there are actually shitot that are different in different hashkachot. Some hashkachot, for example, don't require it to be glat kosher, don't require glat meat. Rabbanut doesn't. Yeah, that's an interesting point. In America, you basically can't find non-glat kosher meat and serve it in a normal Orthodox setting.
What is that?
Glat means that the lung has been checked for lesions and means smooth, chalak.
Right, that's the same thing.
It means that the president have to.
But those are interchangeable terms.
Yes, chalak. Yeah, b'derech klal po hashgacha shel Rabbanut Harashit lo matzrich glat chalak, I guess. But b'chutz la'aretz b'Amerika you have sherlim so. But that's כן, זה תמיד השאלה של בחורי ישיבה. אני הייתי, כאשר למדתי בישיבת שלבים, לא אכלתי בלי בד"ץ. באמת היא שעשיתי התרת נדרים לפני ראש השנה, אמרתי, המנהג שלי זה לא לאכול דווקא גלת, כי ההורים שלי אוכלים בלי גלת. רציתי לאכול בבית של ההורים שלי. משום כיבוד אב ואם, אפשר לאכול. I think that's the same model here also with the tablet K. I would distinguish almost always between lechatchila and b'diavad. Lechatchila, I think mishum benotehem is actually correct. Meaning I don't believe that we should, even though I said, well, everything I said until now, based on the Rambam and the Shulchan Aruch and the way I wanted to move from Rav Moshe, like soft cheese to hard cheese, you can make the argument that all cheese basically around the world is basically permissible, certainly in a supervised setting. I don't think we should do that. I think that, and it's the same thing, by the way, with Stam Yinam. In theory, wine should be totally permissible. There's no ma'achalot asurot concern. And the Rama was actually very makil on stam minam. And I also don't think we should be makil on stam minam or on stam gvina. I'm okay with chalav stam. I think that lechatchila we should maintain the gzeira as a gzeira mishum benotehem, as a way to sort of remind ourselves. Here I'm speaking to myself as a Chutz La'aretz particularly, that there are ways in which we need to maintain boundaries between the Jewish community and the non-Jewish community. One of the ways we do that is by the foods that we eat and we don't eat. Now, obviously, there are plenty of people who are machmir on gvina, whose kids aren't, and then end up marrying non-Jews or whatever it is. However, I'm not naive about the world. I think that it is still a helpful reminder of this Mishnah, actually, that Hisiul Davar Acher is a real thing. And so when it comes to most of the hashkachot that are people question, particularly on cheese, there's a lot of tabukei on cheese and all the many sort of stam supermarkets. I would eat those b'diabet, but not l'chatchila. So my parents, who are sort of, my mom has her kitchen is kosher, but she'll have tablet cheese in her home. So mishum kibureim, I'll eat my mom's home, but I won't bring it into my home. Okay, so there you go. So I think that I'm very machmir on kibud avayim. I'm very machmir halpanat bnei chavero. It's not uncommon where I have friends or family who are not Jewish, not kosher. Oh, we found this great thing and it's kosher, and it's great. I'm so excited, and it's Hebrew National, and I would never eat that in my home in a million years. And I'm gonna have it's kosher, but it's not klat, and I'm gonna enjoy the food at my friend's house. I don't want to embarrass them. I try not to put it on Facebook. I guess it's being recorded. It's okay. But I think that there's a way in which all of these halachot, I want, as a general thumb, I want to be as machmir as I can lechatchila, and as mekel as I can b'diah. And I think that's the way I try to walk through the world. And I'll also say, I try to be as machmir as I can for myself, and as mekel as I can for others, when appropriate. I don't find that to be hypocritical. I think that's, generally speaking, our job, is to help people find the way to be shomer halakha to the best of their ability in the given circumstances in which they live. And so I have my own crazy chumrot, but I don't need to. I don't put them on my kids. I don't put them on my wife. But for others, I want to be as mekel as I can. Okay, after 4:30, happy to take more questions.
Go till 5.
Oh, you go till 5.
You know, I've got time.
Okay, you ended early. Any other questions about cheese? I skipped the fun part of the Rambam. I don't want to go back and work until so mid. It's gonna be a headache.
Could you tell us a little bit about the English credit and about those?
Oh, sure. The Rav ate Kraft cheese. I forgot.
When you mentioned about what you were saying online, what you were saying on Facebook, and I was thinking that the story he tells about the Rav and Kraft cheese.
Yeah,
I
great.
can't imagine that happening.
Yeah, so it's great, right? It's like such a fascinating thing.
It's extremely fast, but I'm thinking like it's a different time.
It's a different time, and there's no Facebook, obviously. So I'll say I was a student of Rabbi Dr. Chaim Salvation, the Rav's son, is Rebel in YU for 2 years. And he's referred to as Dr. Grach. Dr. Chaim Salvation ate Kraft cheese in his home in Riverdale for many years, meaning it's not just in a time or in a place where you can't find kosher cheese, as it were. Maybe in Boston in the 60s and 70s, it was hard to come across kosher cheese. And that was part of the Chazon Ish's claim, that it's hard to find kosher cheese. But Dr. Chaim Soloveitchik in the early 2000s was eating Kraft cheese in his home. Kraft cheese is non-hechshered cheese in Chutz La'aretz. It's not even very good cheese. American cheese. It's like schwach cheese, but it doesn't have hashgacha. There were some people in that class who wouldn't eat in Dr. Soloveitchik's home because he served Kraft cheese. Could you imagine? I can't eat. He's the Rav's son. The man is like a gaon olam. So that's the impulse of Rabbeinu Tam. I mean, it can't be that I'm not going to eat in the Rav's home. It can't, but the Rambam would say you can't eat in the Rav's home because he has non-kosher cheese. And both of those impulses, I think, pull on us as a people. That is to say, if one of the greatest gedolim of our generation's family eats this food, it can't be that I can't eat in that person's home. And the Rambam says it's usher. The Rav knew the Rambam, right? He knew everything. and therefore it's usher. So I think that it pulls people. It's almost like, it's sort of like a difference between, if we fast forward a little bit, in the Mishnah Berurah and the Aruch HaShulchan. Meaning the Aruch HaShulchan was a pulpit rabbi, he was a community rabbi, not a pulpit rabbi in the modern sense, but he was the posek for Lita, for community. And therefore he felt like he also needed to be Melamed Zchut of the men of Klal Yisrael. Mishnah Berurah was a Rosh Yeshiva. He only interacted with nerdy rabbinical students, like most of my life. I hang out with people who spend all day learning these texts who are crazy, who want to, like, I want to keep every halakha. That was the world of the Mishnah Berurah, which is why he could be there for attempts to be Yotzei Kol Hadayot. That's the sort of the tfisa of the Mishnah Berurah. It's not really Rambam per se. It's more like now the Mishnah Berurah has a big library. He has access to many Rishonim for the first time in the early 1900s in Poland. And now I want to be Yotzei Kol Hadayot. And if you're going to try to be Yotzei Kol Hadayot, you're almost always going to be Machmir. And that leads to the Mishnah Berurah, who became for many communities the Posek Acharod and Orach Chaim. The Aruch HaShulchan's tfisa ulamid is more like the Balei HaTosfot. Rabbeinu Tam, if the Jews are doing X, Y, or Z, it has to be kosher. It has to be acceptable. The Aruch HaShulchan has a very famous piece where Chazanim had clips and what's it called, a tuning fork?
Yeah.
They would put it in their mouth to get the key, which is for sure Asur and Shabbat. And the Chazanim were all doing this. Always fights between Chazanim and Rabbanim, and that's how they'd get the key. Put it in between your teeth and you click it.
It gives you an A.
It gives you.
I didn't know you could do it with
It's only one note, and that's how they.
Okay, so we'll find. I'll find a way to
mat.
So the Aruch HaShulchan found a way to matir it. So now, by the way, fancy Chazanim and Chutzaros have a watch that ticks at the right note, at the A, whatever the note is. Have you ever seen fancy Chazanim like whatever, like this, before they start from it?
That's fun.
So that was like a way to get around the problem of the tuning fork between
And
your
that
teeth.
would be mutar because you're not doing it.
Yeah, it's okay. Yeah, it's just ticking. You can actually buy a watch that ticks at a certain pitch. Okay. So, but the Aruch HaShulchan is very famous for matering a tuning fork in the chazas now, because the Chazanim were from Jews and they wanted to like have single lidri very nicely. And now we could put the way the Rav sets it up here, right? When he says, as is well known, the Rav following Ramah ate Kraft cheese. It says here, when no or little Jewish produced cheese was available. That was not true for his son, who lived in Riverdale, like down the block from me. He lived in a place where there was plenty of kosher cheese, and he still ate Kraft non-hechsher cheese. Okay, so this is true in describing the Rav in the 50s and 60s, maybe into the 70s in Boston. It's not true about his family in New York subsequently. He also does, there is certainly yesh al mili smoke, meaning halacha l'ma'aseh. The fact is that there's not really a concern with machalot asarot. Everything is beneath the veshket. For sure, it's technically mutar, and I think it's a good idea to maintain the gzeirah. Okay, you've been sitting here in cheer for a long time between me and Adav, and before that. So I'm happy to continue in shmooze, but everybody go home. It's late. Thank you.
Rob Fox, will you take schmooze time with Zoom?
Sure, absolutely. I love Zoom.
Okay, great.
I don't see you though. How do I see you?
Well, we